Good afternoon. Today is January 20th, and this is the bill hearings for the Ways and Means Committee. First, the committee will hear House Bill 47 with Chair Wilson, and there are 3 individuals signed up to testify. Everyone except Chair Wilson will have 2 minutes. So we will begin with Chair Wilson when you are ready to begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Chair, I see he's not present. Colleagues, here today to present House Bill 47. This is a repeat of a bill that was dropped last year. I'm going to be talking about something that has become, since the dropping last year, very uncomfortable. However, I must clarify, this is not a critical race theory bill. That is dumbing down and oversimplifying what I'm trying to do. But I'll start with this. Currently, there are many states that are passing crazy woke legislation based solely on their feelings. I'm trying to counter that. Florida, for instance, now prohibits teaching on the nation's past or racial indifference in ways that cause discomfort. Texas says we've got to give deference to all sides of any racial debate. Virginia wants to ban the teachings that will burden children with the sins of the father. These are the same folks that a few years ago, by the way, were fighting that Confederate statues should not be torn down because if you don't know your future, you're doomed to repeat it. My, how times have changed. But that's not the reason I'm putting this bill in. Honestly, I put this bill in for all this came up because my daughter was seventh grade at the time. She came up and we have a lot of conversations in our house about American history. And she wanted to know, Dad, why do I know about exactly how many Jews died in the Holocaust, but I don't know how many slaves died in a transatlantic slave trade? Or how many American Indians were massacred and exterminated? Or how many Asian workers died on the railroads? She said, we weren't even over there. We came over there to stop that. Why do we know more about other countries' history than we do ours? My argument is this country, there's an emergency in this country. We're failing to teach facts. And here's the honest to God truth, guys. Nostalgia is what you want to hear. History is what you need to know. We should not conflate the two. But I'll be honest, this is nothing new. We learned about that wonderful love affair between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, that 14-year-old slave, like there was somehow going to be consent, and that he loved his children, his 6 slave children, some of whom were sold to pay off his debt. We learned that Columbus discovered America when he never even landed and set foot in the Americas. Turning the Civil War was not necessarily about slavery, but was about Southern rights. We don't even know, I found this out, 1 out of every 4 cowboys was Black. Where have you ever seen that before? We learned that the American Indians were savages and they were a threat to a civilized culture. Recently, we've learned that Martin Luther King simply wanted to erase the past and pretend that the racial violence never happened. Basically, with the color of the skin versus the content of character. When actually in 1967, Martin Luther King said that whites are not putting a similar mass effort into re-educating themselves out of their racial ignorance. And it is a sense of superiority that they believe they have so little to learn. And I know this is uncomfortable, but these are facts. That was a quote. This is history. It's not whether it feels good or bad. It's what was said. And that's the problem. Contributions in suffering minorities and women have long been overlooked by our history books, except for sometimes those special months. Black history, Hispanic history, women's history. The problem is it's American history and should be taught consistently in our schools. And furthermore, the suffering of a people provides context to the current state and situation. American Indian teenagers living on a reservation where suicide is 10 times higher than the national average. It might be important that they understand just how they got there. And it's not because they're lesser than, but because the actions of a government and mistreatment and extermination. See, this isn't about teaching hate. And I get frustrated when people say that, because we do teach about Hitler. We teach about Stalin, conquistadors. In fact, we teach about the World Trade Center bombings. That seems to be important. We're not as worried about our children learning that, but somehow we're worried about our own history. I'll close by saying this. For those of you guys that think somehow that the sins of the father should not be weighed on the shoulders of the child, how would you feel if Germany said that? If Germany said, you know what, we're not going to keep teaching about the Holocaust because our kids are uncomfortable. Germany makes all of their people, all of their teenagers, take a mandatory visit to walk through the Holocaust museums to make sure they understand that that devastation and that horrific time in our history should not be repeated. America needs to do the same thing. I am proud. I fought for this country. I'm proud of the good and of the bad, for what we did right and what we did wrong. And I defend our right to do both. But what we need to stop doing is pretending that if we're hurting somebody's feelings because we're teaching history or discussing racism, that it is now wrong. Please stop teaching feelings. Please start teaching facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Wilson. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor? So I'll let him hop off. There are two others that are going to testify. Seeing no questions for Chair Wilson. Thank you, Chair Wilson.
Thank you.
Next, Finley Slinker, and you will have 2 minutes to testify.
Hi, I'm Finley Slinker. The history of our country and how it was built has been so deviated from reality. The history of our country was interpreted as the result of the hardships and the will of the white man. The history of so many has been pushed aside in the education system to make learning history more comfortable and appealing to the white population. We need to create change and improve curriculum for U.S. history in schools. As some of you know, last year's bill was HB 11, and it focused solely on the expansion of African American history in Maryland curriculum. This year, as is now HB 47, this bill focuses on not only those of the African American community, but is expanded to include many other racial and ethnic groups throughout our history. HB 47 will now include the history of Native Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Hispanic Americans, women, as well as African Americans, and any other groups as determined by the State Board. As a student who's actively involved in learning and interested in history, I've noticed a repeated pattern of missing parts of our history that leave loopholes in the timeline of other races and ethnic groups in America to focus on the white perspective of our history. I believe that all of those who have struggled and faced discrimination to get to the point where they are now are significantly unrepresented in the education system and legislature around the nation. I strongly urge you all to please vote in favor of HB 47 to help us all understand and create a stronger America. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of HB 47 and all of those who will benefit by it.
Thank you, Ms. Slinker. Are there any questions for Ms. Slinker? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today to testify. There was one signed up unopposed. I will call his name, although I don't see him in here. Vince McAvoy. And I don't see him in here, so that concludes the testimony on House Bill 47. Next, calling House Bill 37, Delegate Chi, good to see you. This is a bill sponsor only, so whenever you're ready, Delegate Chi, please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me, and congratulations. I'm excited to join you for this very brief bill hearing under the new chairwoman, but also this is my very first bill for the session. So I'm very pleased to be here. First of all, I want to thank this committee, Ways and Means, for your hard work last session that got this bill passed in the House. And the reason it did not move in the Senate was because the Senate chairman somehow thought this would collide with another bill in the making that sounded similar and was also had to do with sign language interpreters. So now we clarified with them, and we got a new cross-file sponsor in Senator Nancy King, who has also been passionate about this issue and working on similar issues. So hopefully this year we'll pass both chambers. Just to refresh everyone's memory, this year's version is exactly the version we passed by this committee and the entire House. What the bill does, HB 37, it simply establishes minimum professional standards in Maryland public schools for the sign language interpreters in our schools. So what it does is it requires the Maryland State Board of Education and the Professional Standards and the Teacher Education Board, the PSTEB board, to develop regulations for the certification of educational interpreters in our schools by July 1st, 2023. This committee actually took away all the numerical requirements about testing scores and the training hours and so forth, and say it would be better just to leave it to the professional standard boards to decide what is the minimum floor that we should have statewide. And the reason for that is because it might be shocking to some new members who have never heard of this bill. As much as we take pride in the wonderful, standards of competitiveness of our educational system nationwide, Maryland is actually among 5 states that have no minimum standards for educational interpreters. And I'm talking about educational interpreters, not just any kind of sign language interpreters. Okay. Because of that, the qualities of these sign language interpreters in our public schools are all over the map. Some of them do take national level tests and get certified. Others are not. Some of them are considered professionals. Others are just contract workers, and they're paid very differently. There's also a lack of understanding and respect for that profession. And the universe is not very large. We're talking about a total of 121 employees between full-time and part-time in the entire state of Maryland. So whatever we need to do is very manageable. And this bill calls for development of certification standards by July 1st, 2023, but it gives 7 years for the currently employed sign language interpreters to get on board, to get tested, trained, tested, and certified. And according to the fiscal note, there's the boards can develop these standards with the current resources. So the fees are very nominal, and it should have next to no fiscal impact on the board work as well as the county school systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate G? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 37. Thank you, Delegate G.
Thank you.
Next, we will move on to House Bill 84 with Delegate Ruth, which is also sponsor only. So welcome, Delegate Ruth, and whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth presenting House Bill 84. This is a bill that passed the House of Delegates in 2021 and is in the same posture. It modifies a section of the Education Code which currently allows students to be charged with a misdemeanor for disturbing school activities. Students can be arrested for typical adolescent behavior like storming out of class, talking back, or refusing to follow directions. The human brain's executive functioning is not fully developed until around age 25, and young people often lack the impulse control that allows most adults to filter their words and actions. Of course, young people need to learn appropriate behavior, but not through the criminal justice system. That's not the place to teach appropriate behavior. And in fact, the trauma from contact with the criminal justice system could make the situation worse. A 2006 study showed that arrest and court appearance increases the incidence of dropping out of school. So this law actually goes against the best educational outcomes for students. 1,700 Maryland students were charged under this law in 2019, and 82% of the students charged in FY 2020 were Black or students of color. So there are deep disparities in the application of this law. The law also disproportionately impacts disabled children. Children with disabilities represent 23% of all school arrests, but only make up 12% of the entire student population. Students with developmental disabilities may, due to their disabilities, act out in ways that can wrongly be perceived as threatening. School behavior management systems should be used to teach young people appropriate behavior. For more challenging behavioral issues, diversion programs are a better alternative to the criminal justice system. But most importantly, any conduct that rises to the level of criminal activity, like threats, assault, firearms offenses, theft, trespassing, can still be charged under the criminal code. In your bill file, you will find a memo from the Office of the Public Defender outlining just some of the criminal charges that can be used for any actions that actually rise to the level of criminal behavior. This law does not belong in the education code. It's redundant and unnecessary, disproportionately applied. The education code should be focused on the ultimate goal of student success and preparation for the future. One final note that the Latino caucus just voted to endorse this bill. So I ask for a favorable report for HB 84, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Ruth? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 84. Thank you, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you.
Next, moving on to House Bill 95, Delegate Bagnall, I see is here. And you have a couple bills with us, and you are the only witness on this bill. So whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Heather Bagnall, District 33 in Anne Arundel County, here on behalf of HB 95, Anne Arundel County Board of Education meeting requirements and officers. You have my written testimony, so I'll try to summarize. Over the course of the last 3 years, due to the bill passed by the General Assembly in 2017, in Anne Arundel County, we have been transitioning from a fully appointed to a now fully elected school board. And that transition has brought with it some growing pains. For 3 years, my office has been fielding concerns about meetings running well into the night, impacting not only board members, but many of whom have children, jobs, and additional responsibilities. You know, parents with school-age children and teachers who are trying to be engaged in the school board processes, but also the Anne Arundel County staff who still have responsibilities beyond the school board meetings. We have all been in hearings which stretched our ability to focus, follow, be informed, and articulate. But even within the crushing workload of our 90-day session, we put limits on length of testimony, on questions from members, on extemporizing beyond the scope of the agenda or issue at hand. And we know that session, that workload is not going to stretch out in perpetuity. Additionally, we have shared resources such as committee staff, office staff, and whole state agencies at our disposal. Although we have made some very recent improvements, it is my firm belief that we are violating the spirit, if not the letter, of the open meetings law within the board. So I propose 4 simple guidelines to address the issue. This bill stipulates that the Anne Arundel County School Board may not vote on any action after 10 p.m. The board must elect a parliamentarian at its annual meeting who is to advise the members of rules, procedures, and precedents, and the board must complete the public portion of every meeting within 6 hours. These provisions are meant to make it easier for the public to participate, attend meetings in their entirety, stay up to date on board actions, and voice their opinions on proposals, while also allowing the board members to work more efficiently, establish more reasonable work-life balance for members and staff, and set an achievable agenda. The legislation also allows for exceptions to some of these rules to maintain that the members are still able to accomplish their important work to the community. This bill is modeled after a motion which failed to achieve 5 votes, the motion of which was also modeled on actions taken by other larger school jurisdictions. Additionally, although I would prefer not to interject the will of the General Assembly into our local school board, once again, this legislation is a final, not a first effort at a course correction. As this committee is well aware, education is the great equalizer, one of the strongest investments we can make in the future of our children, our workforce, and our economy. And the work of our board is essential. I understand the committee will want to know where the delegation stands, and I will be presenting this bill to our Anne Arundel County delegation on Friday, January 28th. Thank you for your consideration of this important local legislation, and I respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 95.
Thank you. I see a question from Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Delegate Bagnall, to your credit, you sort of addressed one of my 2 questions. So the Anne Arundel County delegation, obviously, we've just started session. They haven't taken a position as to whether the whole delegation supports the legislation or not, but you'll let the committee know, obviously, based upon whether it's really a local bill or not.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then secondly, you kind of mentioned that you patterned some of the provisions of this on things that other school boards had done. I think that's what you just said. Who are those? I mean, I'm always interested in, are there any other counties where we have a state law that governs what the local county school boards, what time they can meet or vote or things of that nature? Are there other examples out there?
There are other examples, but they're national examples. They're not, I wasn't able to find a specific example in Maryland. the
Okay.
issue that it's hard to compare apples to apples because every county doesn't set up the same type of school board. I think Prince George's is a hybrid between appointed and elected. We just moved to a fully elected. So there's not a lot of precedent to do a side-by-side comparison within the state.
I mean, my understanding, at least, and this is only, I didn't do any research. It's only based on being on this committee for the last 7 or 8 years. Almost all of the state or the county boards of education are elected now. There's still a couple that are hybrids that have some appointees, but for the vast majority of the state, they've had elected school boards for many years. So that's my only question is, like, to your knowledge, is there any other state law or anything else that's been done from the legislature that governs with this degree of detail a local school board's operations?
I don't have the answer to that question.
you.
Honestly, we're actually in a research process as we speak.
No, I understand. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Delegate Lasanti.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for your efforts and transparency. Just a quick question on how your school board operates. Is there any prohibition to them meeting virtually, or are all their meetings in person? How have they been operating during COVID?
They've been pivoting. They were in person, and then they went fully virtual, and then they had a hybrid, and even that they were navigating that process because there was a desire to be when they were back in person to be in person only, but they landed on a hybrid platform.
Okay, might be something you want to consider when you're looking at operational rules. Obviously, virtual has more opportunities for people to engage versus in person. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Jones.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Delegate Lasani did cover one of the things, and out of respect, I didn't want to take down my hand, but thank you, Delegate Bagnall, as the effort to have a transparency. I know that I have heard, much like you, so many parents calling the office because they simply cannot participate due to the fact that it's going well into the middle of the night. Could you just touch upon the parliamentary appointment once more, the provision that went fast? I'm sorry, could you just review that once more, please?
Certainly. So one of the aspects of the bill is calling upon an elected parliamentarian. They would elect from within their own body at the same time that they're electing their president and their vice president. There is some question about, because in the bill, we said that they would be able to use the county law office as a resource. There is a question about whether it needs to be a state entity versus a county entity, and we're looking at that right now. So we're not married to that language.
Well, thank you so much. I know that this is a great concern here in Anne Arundel County, and I'm appreciative. Thank you.
Are there any other further questions? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 95. Delegate Bagnall, don't go anywhere because the next bill is yours too. House Bill 56, and there are 3 individuals signed up to testify. So whenever you are ready, you may begin, and the other witnesses will have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And once again, good afternoon to our chair, our vice chair, and members of the committee. For the record, once again, I'm Delegate Heather Bagnall, District 33, Anne Arundel County, and I'm here on behalf of HB 56, Commission on Student Behavioral Health and Mental Health Treatment. It is in the same posture as it passed the House in 2021. You have my written testimony, so I'll try to quickly summarize the necessity of the bill. According to the CDC, 1 in 5 children will experience a significant mental health challenge in their early years. As part of the blueprint for Maryland's future, this committee saw fit to add additional funding for behavioral health and mental health services within the blueprint, and to establish mental health coordinators and the consortium, recognizing the need for more robust resources, both in health providers and in funding. However, the guidance for health services, and in particular behavioral health services in an educational setting, are still quite vague. And as there are a wide variety of service providers who provide mental, emotional, and behavioral health services in our schools, we need to take a holistic view of their services and how they are meeting the needs of our students. As discussed in the previous session, within the existing certification guidance, The reference to mental health, for example, refers to psychological services, and the guidance says only that schools will provide psychological services as they relate to education. So there isn't a clean way in which these teams are operating. We want to ensure that behavioral health services provided to our students in Maryland are not only high quality, but equitable and consistent across schools and providers. But to do that, we need people with the right expertise helping to define and refine that landscape. HB 56 seeks to create a commission to evaluate the entire spectrum of care in an educational setting and evaluate, update, and make recommendations to the guidelines, including but not limited to mental health and behavioral health services. It will be staffed by the Behavioral Health Administration. Last year, as I said, the bill did pass out of the House, but due to timing was not able to pass the Senate. Behavioral health is already a complicated landscape, addressing the immediate need for IEPs and 504s and the broader concerns of adverse childhood experiences and other challenges. And providers need a common language if they are to be effective as part of the administrative team and the greater school community. HB 56 would address the gaps in services and create a more universal language and continuity of services across the entire educational spectrum through a health lens. With the closure of school buildings, the transition to online learning, and added trauma of COVID, and the additional challenges students are experiencing with the return to physical classrooms, we have a greater need for a commission with the right expertise to meet that need. You should see in your floor system a technical amendment with some clarifying language, and I thank you for your kind consideration and request a favorable report.
Thank you. Next, we have Scott Tiffin, and you will have 2 minutes to testify. Committee, I will just note that we did pass this before. This one kind of slipped through because our rule is that if it did pass the committee before, then it's sponsor only. But we have 2 other folks here. We're going to go ahead and let them testify and then do questions. So Scott, you can go ahead.
I will be super quick then. So my name is Scott Tiffin. I'm here on behalf of the social workers, as well as the school psychologists, the licensed professional counselors, and the school-based health centers. Just wanted to give support to this bill. You know, as been noted, the blueprint showed how important mental health services are to providing education for our kids. So we just wanted to, put some support in there. But since you guys have time limits, I just want to I'll let it go. But if you have any questions, happy to answer.
Okay, thank you. And we have one other individual signed up to testify, Vince McAvoy. And while we're waiting to find him, I will call on Delegate Palkovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a question for the bill sponsor. First of all, thank you, Delegate Bagnall, for bringing this bill back. I don't know if you've had a chance to see, but MSDE had submitted some informational testimony, basically raising the issue of how this commission would be different from the Maryland Consortium on Community Supports that was part of the blueprint. And so I wondered if you just had a response to that and could clarify for the committee about how this commission differs perhaps from what's in the blueprint.
And thank you for that question. And Madam Chair, I do apologize. I didn't get that note about the sponsor only. But in answer to your question, we actually worked with the vice chair last year on defining how this commission and the consortium were different. That said, I am also talking with the Department of Health to see if there is duplicative work or if there is sort of a bucket under which this work could be achieved. But because we didn't have a clear path, we didn't want to pull the bill before we had a clear answer.
Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just technical, I think. I'm looking at the end of the bill and the reporting date seems a little unclear to me. Maybe your amendment addressed it. I couldn't find it on the floor system. It says on or before July 1, 2023 and December 1, 2023. Can you unpack that? It's supposed to be between them because it says before. Just trying to figure out when we're going to get the report.
I'm so sorry. I have a cat that's freaking out.
It's section G, way at the end.
That may be a technical error.
Yeah, thank you. I thought, I was hoping it was the amendment, but we probably just clarify that a little bit. Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is Vince McAvoy in? So for anyone who is listening, I see he's come in under a different name, but please, please, please register. The name that you enter has to match the name that you registered with. Otherwise, staff will be scrambling, trying to figure out who you are, and we can't do that. But Vince McAvoy, you will have 2 minutes to testify. You're on mute. On mute.
There we go. Thank you so much, Chair. Appreciate that. Welcome to your new location. I thank you for letting me get to this bill. And I want to say this because, as you know, my concern is childcare. I see something that the delegate just brought up, Julia, about duplicative issues. And we've seen this with both the blueprint, with the extensive work that Kerwin did, where social issues and behavioral issues were brought up as part, especially from where I'm at in the city, as well as where we saw recently the Maryland State Board of Education do a 97-page report on schools specifically focusing on Black boys to try and help them in their efforts. Now, my concern about this bill is that we've also had a report in Montgomery County, this is dated maybe about 10 years ago, that did an issue showing that exercise was one of the prime things that helped children both perform physically and mentally on their testing. It seems to me like we're looking to allocate behavioral issues as opposed to fixing the issues causing these behavioral things. We just went through COVID. We saw the wreckage that happened amongst our school children when they were not around their friends. They needed to be around their comrades and to be near them, to talk to them, to associate with them. That's what helped them socially. And so it seems to me like we already have the answers and that we're looking to somehow tie up or link in a behavioral issue as opposed to just making sure that the children are healthy and doing well in the first place. And so when we have bills that, where we're seeing all manner of advocacies getting involved in our children's lives after term's over, we saw NARA, we saw Planned Parenthood getting involved in these issues. These folks are not focused on our children. They're focused on their agenda. And so I want to focus on children. We have reports from Maryland State
Mr.
Board of
McAvoy,
Education.
if you could wrap it up.
Thank you, Chair. The Maryland State Board of Education, of course, Kerwin talked a lot about this. I think we have answers right there. So thank you all for your time and for your courtesy.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. McAvoy? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 56. Thank you, Delegate Bagnall. And folks, we are going to go a little bit out of order because our vice chair, who has two bills, is testifying in ECM currently. So we are going to move to Delegate Kerr with House Bill 136. And there are 12 witnesses. So Delegate Kerr, I will let you begin, and everyone else following you will have 2 minutes. So welcome, Delegate Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm Delegate Ken Kerr, and I thank you for giving us this time to present House Bill 136. Seizure Safe Schools is a piece of legislation that we have been working on now for 3 years. We bring it back this year after working over the interim with stakeholders to address their concerns, and these concerns have been addressed in this draft. So my panel will be giving details about the importance and the need for this bill. But Madam Chair, as you and Delegate Charles were not previously on this committee, I'd like to give some history. Seizure Safe Schools will require that all school personnel who interact with students be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of a seizure and understand how to correctly respond. It involves a 1-hour online training that can be completed at the teacher or staff member's convenience within a time frame set by the local school system so as to minimize the effect on on the limited professional development time. So while we've reached general agreement with stakeholders, there were some misconceptions and concerns expressed at last session's Education Subcommittee hearing that I'd like to address. First, deals with the objection to additional state mandated training prior to the start of the school year, and that it takes away that limited valuable professional development time and the topics that are of most importance to the local school system. So I investigated this by asking MSDE for a list of their state required professional development. And I also submitted a PIA to Frederick County Public Schools to get a list of the topics that they cover during their fall professional development days. My thinking was that if these are state mandated topics, I would only need to take a look at a single school system to see how compliance was going. So in my written testimony, I provided you with these documents. And unless I'm missing something, I can only find 2 instances where what the state says they require actually occur at the county school system's professional development day. So as I said, unless I'm misunderstanding or missing something, it looks as if the majority of those topics are locally generated. So related to that concern is when this training should occur. But there's no need for it to take place during those jam-packed days prior to the start of the school year. This training can be done at the teacher's convenience, online, in any setting. And we've made changes to the bill, so it's only required every other year rather than every year. We also eliminated the requirement for student training. And these details will be worked out with the Maryland Department of Health with assistance from the National Epilepsy Foundation and any other interested stakeholders, so as to minimize the effect on the local school systems. Another area that the subcommittee inquired about was the quality of the training. And I had requested to be able to show a 3-minute video clip that would show you the pedagogical approach of the training and the quality of production, but committee staff informed us that that was not permitted. So I did send you the link to that, and I asked that you please take a few minutes to view it if you have not already done so. A final point needing clarification that arose from last session's Education Subcommittee hearing related to the need for this legislation at all, and questioned how many children and how many schools would actually be affected. The implication was that it was rare. I believe the question that was asked was, are we talking about one school and one child? Well, as you will hear from my panel, each year, between 25,000 and 40,000 people between the ages of 4 and 17 will experience their first seizure. 1 in 10 people will have a seizure at some point in their lives, and 1 in 26 will develop epilepsy. A Johns Hopkins study found that an average of 6 children in each school suffers from epilepsy, more than diabetes, more than sickle cell anemia, or the students in danger of anaphylaxis. In fact, the 3 most common student emergencies in school are: number 1, seizures; 2, respiratory distress; and 3, psychiatric and behavioral emergencies. So far from an isolated event, seizures are more likely than not to occur at every school at any time. House Bill 136 is a life-saving bill. Maryland, a leader in public education, is not leading in this area. When we first brought this bill in 2020, 5 states had enacted this legislation. Now, 12 have enacted the legislation, and the bill's moving through South Carolina, passed the House committee yesterday, and it's already been introduced in Missouri as well. So I thank you for the time to explain what it is we're trying to do with this bill. And please ask my panel to explain or provide additional information or answer any remaining questions or concerns you have. Also, please include the advocates in any subcommittee discussions where they can quickly and easily provide information and answers to any questions or concerns that may arise. We ask for a favorable report on House Bill 136 for Brindley and the 7,900 other children in Maryland experiencing seizures, as well as those we count on to be able to appropriately react and responsibly respond.
Thank you, Delegate Kerr. And everyone on the committee should have received the link to the video that was requested. We can't show all the videos. I was just requested by the National Federation of the Blind to play one that was 5 minutes. So we get a lot of requests, but I'm sure the committee will take a look at the video. So now we will move on to those that are signed up to testify in support of the legislation. Each of you will have 2 minutes, and I will start with Ms. Buhantanini.
Hi, how are you? It's Sarajit Bhutani. Thank you very much. My name is Sarajit Bhutani. I live in Rockville, Maryland, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my experience as a woman living with epilepsy. I'm also the proud mother of an epilepsy warrior. My 20-year-old daughter, Pri, has lived with seizures for a decade. I'm an educator with Montgomery County Public Schools, and I have witnessed firsthand the anxiety of my colleagues when even discussing caring for a child with a seizure disorder. I attended Baltimore County Public Schools in the 80s. When I had a seizure at school, I was sent to the emergency room. Today, as a mom and as an educator, it is disheartening to know that staff seizure safety training and awareness is still lacking. That's why I'm here to advocate on behalf of Brindley's Act. When Pri attended Montgomery County Public Schools, the most we could have expected was for only the immediate people working with Pri to be seizure first aid trained. It left Pri vulnerable on the blacktop, in the cafeteria, on the stairwells, in the locker banks, after school activities, and anywhere else where these few adults were not present. Our family withdrew Pri from MCPS after freshman year to attend the Academy of Holy Cross. We chose a setting where the staff and students were all trained on seizure first aid. My daughter was saved thanks to the staff at her new school, because they were prepared and they knew exactly how to respond when she had her first seizure at school. She was in a bustling cafeteria. She was making her way through tight rows of cafeteria tables when she fell to the ground, started convulsing, and had a grand mal seizure. A few staff members arrived right away. They calmly instructed the other girls to give Pri space and to clear out. They rolled Pri to the side. One staff member took her jacket off and placed it under Pri's head to protect her from hurting herself. They waited for the seizure to pass and then comforted Pri by calmly telling her, "Pri, you are okay. You just had a seizure. You're going to be fine. Don't worry about anything."
Thank you. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your testimony.
Okay. I think back to how the staff took care of Pri in a relaxed, non-anxious way. And it breaks my heart to imagine that Pri would have been left banging her head over and over again on the floor with panicked teachers and students in shock, not knowing how to help with untrained staff. Imagine what that does, not just to the child, but the school community. Seizure response and first aid training for school personnel is vital. Our family was fortunate to have the option of private schools. That's not the case for all families. And my humble request is please support Brindley's Act so all children can be kept safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next for 2 minutes, Britt Dorfman. Britt Dorfman. Okay, I'll circle back. Lauren Schillinger.
Yes, thank you, Chair Atterbury and the members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Lauren Schillinger, and my daughter is Brindley, who the bill is named after. In 2014, Brindley began having seizures and spent a week at Children's National. She was diagnosed with epilepsy and a rare genetic disorder called tuberous sclerosis complex. She was put on numerous anti-seizure medications and at the time had 25 seizures a day. She had 2 brain surgeries, and thankfully the surgery did reduce her seizures, but she still has tumors in her brain and it can cause seizures at any time. Every day, we have to carry a seizure rescue medication at all times to interrupt seizures that won't stop or a cluster of seizures to avoid brain damage. As we approached the time for her to begin preschool, we were worried and scared about how she'd be able to attend school safely. We wondered, how would our staff be able to recognize a seizure and how would they know how to administer rescue medications?
We knew we had to make a change so we wouldn't be faced with this every year until she graduates high school. We worked with Delegate Kerr starting in 2019 to create seizure safe school legislation. We're not just concerned about Brindley, but the almost 8,000 students in Maryland and an additional 59,900 adults in Maryland who live every day with seizures and epilepsy. As Delegate Kerr said, there's already 12 states where this is passed and another 15 in the works. This critical online training is free and already created by the National Epilepsy Foundation and only takes about 45 minutes to complete. We believe 45-minute biannual training is critical to save lives, and it's a small request because tragically children do die from seizures, as it can be life-threatening or create brain damage. Maryland would be protecting almost 8,000 children with epilepsy and seizures, not to mention all of those that have a very first seizure for the first time during a school day. If House Bill 136 becomes Brindley's Act, 16,000 parents, including my husband and I, would sleep better every night knowing that our children are safe as possible in school. And we ask that the committee please support seizure safe schools in Maryland, House Bill 136. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next for 2 minutes, Emily Sikine.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Emily Sikine. I'm a resident of Potomac, Maryland. I'm here to advocate on behalf of Brindley's Act. This legislation is very important to my family as our daughter, Naomi, suffers from epilepsy. Naomi started having larger seizures when she was 10 years old, entering the 5th grade. That first year in the 5th grade, due to Naomi's medications, making her feel tired, have headaches, especially first thing in the morning, she went to the nurse's office to try to avoid the classroom where they had her call me. Naomi missed math class nearly every day. She never had a seizure at school that year, but there was clearly a lack of understanding of what epilepsy is and the need for her to stay in the classroom so as not to miss instruction. All of Naomi's teachers and health room staff seemed very anxious, which further fueled Naomi's anxiety about having a seizure at school, making the problem even worse. I met with the school many times that school year and described the problem to her teachers and school administrators, but I could not do anything more to help the problem from the inside of the school, and she was falling behind academically. So we made the decision to switch Naomi to private school for the 6th grade. She was able to be in a smaller and more understanding environment. Her new school helped her stay in the classroom and overcome her anxiety about her seizures and feeling slow and tired from her meds. I truly believe that seizure awareness and response training would help familiarize school personnel about seizures and what children with epilepsy face on a day-to-day basis. This training would help normalize seizures for staff, which would then help relieve anxiety, ensure school is a safe place for kids with epilepsy, both physically and emotionally. Thank you so much for your consideration of Brindley's Act. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you. Next, Diana Bremen for 2 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Diana Bremen. I'm an educator with the Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I'm also a person living with epilepsy. Every day I ask myself, will I have a seizure at school today? Will anyone know how to help me? Now consider this exact same scenario if you have a child with epilepsy. How comfortable would you be sending your child to school, asking yourself, will my child have a seizure today? Who will be able to help them? At the start of each school year, teachers in the Anne Arundel County are trained on several health issues, such as recognizing allergic reactions, diabetes, and sickle cell anemia. Not long after my diagnosis, I sat in this training and it occurred to me, if one of my students had a seizure, no one would know what to do. This year, my hallway alone had 2 students, 2 teachers, including myself, and a teaching assistant with epilepsy. In the United States, there's approximately 470,000 school-age children with epilepsy versus the 208,000 children with diabetes. I'm not dismissing the seriousness of diabetes, but our students and staff who may experience a seizure at school should have the same protection. To someone not trained in seizure recognition, it may appear to be something different. For example, atonic seizures, once referred to as drop attacks, mimic fainting. Myoclonic seizures are sudden involuntary muscle jerks that could be confused with a tic. Absence seizures, which are very common in children, are a blank stare. This child would appear to be unfocused or daydreaming. Teachers could confuse this seizure with ADHD. We need to know signs of seizures. Parents trust that staff will keep their child safe at school. Should there be emergencies, teachers are our first responders. It's critical that teachers know the correct safety measures to protect our students. Under this bill, teachers would be provided with individualized seizure action plans for each child with epilepsy so that we may respond appropriately. A seizure action plan is different from IEPs or 504s, as those plans help students reach academic goals and access curriculum. A seizure action plan provides details for how to safely respond to a student that can experience a seizure. Providing training to faculty and staff not only protects students with current seizure diagnoses, but also those that may experience their first seizure at school. We need to correct old, dangerous ways of thinking, such as putting things in the mouth of someone experiencing a seizure. Training is not required.
I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap up your testimony.
Yes, ma'am. As training explains, we can save a child using stay safe side. Stay with the child, keep them safe from things that may hurt them, and time the seizures, and roll them to their side. And again, please pass House Bill 136 to help protect our children.
Thank you. Next, Robin Elliott for 2 minutes. Good to see you, Robin. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Hello, everyone. Robin Elliott. I am here today on behalf of the Maryland Nurses Association and the Maryland Association of School Health Nurses. In support of the bill, we want to thank the sponsor and the advocates very much for working with us and just ensuring that technically the bill aligns with nursing law. This bill is really important. Seizures are very common, and as I've learned more about it, and one of the things the nurses have highlighted for me is that seizures can happen at any time to anyone within a school system, so students and staff. So the awareness in this bill is really crucial because we don't know who's going to have a seizure and when. And the provisions around administering emergency medication really augment and build upon the protocols that nurses have in schools now, just emphasizing that this should be a priority for schools. We ask for a favorable amendment and pledge to work with the committee on anything that you should need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, for 2 minutes, we have Andy Culp.
Thanks, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Andy Culp, and I'm with the ARC Maryland. And we are here in support of House Bill 136. And the ARC is a statewide advocacy organization dedicated to the rights and quality of life of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And you have my written testimony, which includes some data sources and a map of the 12 states that have already passed seizure safe schools legislation, including our neighbors in Virginia and New Jersey. And I'm hoping that this session we can add Maryland to that list. I support House Bill 136 for all the reasons that the previous advocates articulated, because we believe that children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families and school teachers would particularly benefit from greater seizure awareness and training. And then because research shows that 20% of people with an intellectual disability have epilepsy. The prevalence of epilepsy is also high in children with developmental delays. Some studies show over 56% of people with developmental delays experience seizures. Research also shows that children with prior unrecognized seizures are at higher risk, for presenting behavior issues at school. And as Ms. Bremen mentioned, children may be having absent seizures that make it look like they're not focusing on the instruction, or they may be exhausted or confused, which would manifest as irritability and anxiousness. And the bright light in these statistics is that often, once epilepsy is discovered and treated, behavior challenges may diminish. And one Maryland mother recently described in her family struggle watching her once happy son doing well in school, starting to communicate, reading sight words, regulating behavior, slowly slipping away from them. And it wasn't until they recognized that he was experiencing seizures and his brain was experiencing a firestorm, he was exhausted, and that they got treatment for that, that he slowly returned to his happy-go-lucky self and regain a lot of his independent skills. The bottom line is that the idea of seizures and timely treatment can benefit the student, the family, and other students in the classroom and educators. So we hope the General Assembly sees this bill through to passage this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kira, and I'm going to go with Eyring.
That's correct.
Great. 2 minutes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kira Eyring, and I'm the Executive Director of the Epilepsy Foundation in Maryland. Thank you for holding this hearing and for providing an opportunity for public testimony on the House Bill 136, also known as Brindley's Act. The Epilepsy Foundation Maryland serves the nearly 60,000 people living with epilepsy across the state, including nearly 8,000 children. We're very proud to support this legislation and are encouraged by the momentum in Maryland and across the state and across the country. To date, there are 12 states now that have passed seizure safe schools legislation, including our neighbors, Virginia and New Jersey. Epilepsy is a condition of the brain which causes recurring seizures. It's the fourth most common neurological disorder in the country. It's a spectrum disease comprised of many diagnoses, including an ever-growing number of rare epilepsies. There are many different types of seizures and varying levels of seizure control. Seizures are common and can happen to anyone at any time, anywhere. Approximately 1 in 10 people may experience a seizure during their lifetime. An individual may not necessarily have a diagnosis of epilepsy to have a seizure. Seizures are associated with other medical conditions, high fever, low blood sugar, head injuries. Therefore, recognizing the different types of seizures and how to respond effectively and appropriately can be life-saving, not just for the students with epilepsy, but anyone in the school community. The Epilepsy Foundation, through our work with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has designed 2 trainings geared towards school personnel and school nurses that would encompass seizure recognition and first aid response. These trainings are certified for continuing nurse education credits for school nurses and continuing education credits for certified health education specialists. School personnel would receive a certificate of completion. The trainings would be provided for free, either in person or online on demand. Direct access to school nursing and other health services, as well as disease-specific education.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Yep, has been shown to improve health and academic outcomes among students with chronic health conditions. Brindley's Act would help keep students who experience seizures safer at school and create a supportive environment. We thank you so much for your time today and hope you will support our initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Lauren, and Lauren, introduce yourself because I don't want to butcher your last name. So if you could introduce yourself and then you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sure. Hi, my name is Lauren DiBattista. This is my son, Gavin. We thank you very much for allowing us to speak today in support of Brindley's Act. Gavin was diagnosed with epilepsy at age 5 after having 2 unprovoked seizures. His epilepsy later became drug resistant. We've unfortunately experienced many of the devastating consequences of seizures. Over the years, Gavin has had 3 brain surgeries in an effort to gain seizure control. Constant seizure activity and his most recent surgery in October resulted in deficits to the entire left side of his body. Over the past 3 months, he has worked very hard retraining his brain and his body how to walk and use his hand and arm. There's a long list of things I worry about on a daily basis when it comes to Gavin, and his well-being at school is among the top of those concerns. A small piece of our story that I feel really illustrates the reality of the statistics and the power of awareness involves another child named Katie. Katie and Gavin attended preschool together. Katie had a seizure in the summer of 2019. Coincidentally, just a few months prior, Katie's mom brought our family a meal in the days following Gavin's first brain surgery. Fortunately, having a connection to our experience gave her awareness that allowed her to act with knowledge during her own daughter's seizure. I'm really happy to report that to this day, Katie has remained seizure-free. Unfortunately, epilepsy can be very isolating and seizures can carry a stigma, but the reality is that seizures and seizure disorders are quite common. With the statistics like the 1 in 26 people being diagnosed with epilepsy and the 1 in 10 people experiencing a seizure during their lifetime, chances are you know a Gavin or a Katie too. Seizures have been identified as one of the top 3 emergencies in schools, as has been noted. Aside from the 7,900 students who have diagnosed seizure disorders in the state of Maryland, it would not be unheard of for school personnel to find themselves responding to a seizure emergency of a student without prior history. I myself am a part of the 1 in 10, having suffered a seizure as a child due to heat exhaustion. Seizures can be unpredictable and take you by surprise. Our school communities deserve the tools to act from a place of awareness, knowledge, and preparedness when handling seizures, which makes passing Brindley's Act all the more urgent. And Gavin did want to just say hello.
Okay. Hi, Gavin. Thank you for being here today.
He's a little nervous, but he
Aw.
appreciates you considering this bill. We really do.
Thank you. Next, we have Josh Howe for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Josh Howe with Compass Government Relations here on behalf of the Maryland Association for Justice. The Maryland Association for Justice is the trade association of plaintiffs' attorneys operating in the state advocating for victims of negligence. MAJ is critical of legislative grants of immunity because victims of negligent conduct lose their chance to get justice in court. MAJ understands the necessity for immunities for certain public health purposes. However, when these immunities get introduced, we attempt to offer clearer definitions of immunity eligibility to limit adverse impact to victims of negligence. We have amendments outlined in my one-pager that I submitted to the committee. The amendment may seem like it's splitting hairs because we're simply asking for a change in the reorder of words. However, by inserting in accordance with this section and before good faith on page 5, line 2, MAJ believes this emphasizes the 2 conditions of receiving immunity: acting in accordance with the section or the developed action plan and acting in good faith. As drafted, MAJ asserts that the following scenario could occur. An employee responds to a student experiencing a seizure as defined by the seizure action plan mandated in House Bill 136, without regard to the provisions in the actual action plan, and negligently causes harm or injury to the student. That employee can then claim good faith, and because of the way it's written currently, that victim who also suffered a seizure and was hurt during the conduct of the responding is limited by the immunity to receive access to justice. We humbly request that the committee consider these amendments, and we ask for a favorable amendment report.
Thank you. Next, John Willems for 2 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and here today to testify in support of House Bill 136 with amendments. Want to begin by expressing our great appreciation to Delegate Kerr for the amendments that he has incorporated into this year's version of the bill. It has resulted in our position of opposition shifting to one of support with amendments. We also appreciate the involvement, as we always do on school health related bills, of the representatives of the Nurses Association and School Nurse Association, and their assurance that they are okay with a school health related bill counts a lot. And yet we continue to have really serious concerns about the mandate in the bill that every school be required to designate at least 2 individuals. One could include the school nurse, who would then be required to be trained not only in providing first aid in cases of emergency seizures, but also administering or assisting in the administration of medication. And while that may be appropriate, and language could be adopted to say may be required in accordance with the emergency seizure plan, student health plan as supplemented by the seizure plan, to require that every school have at least 2 individuals approved to administer this emergency medication seems to be a very kind of high standard of care inappropriately assigned to lay people in administering medication to be administered by injection or other invasive means. And so while it may certainly be appropriate for a parent, doctor, school nurse to triangulate that agreement on the contents of the student's plan, to mandate it as a one-size-fits-all every school mandate is of great concern to us. And so we look forward to working with the committee on amendments to help provide, I think, some kind of tailor-made school-based responses to student health needs of students with seizure disorders. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I will call Britt Dorfman. Are you in the room? One last time, Britt Dorfman.
She'll not be orally testifying today, just her written response.
Thank you for that. Okay, I do see a question of Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few, with your permission, just a couple to different people. First, to the bill sponsor, we have two parts of training, and I'm curious what you see as their roles. One is you have the two trained individuals in the building, and then you go on to add in that all personnel have to be trained biannually. What do you see as the difference in their roles? Are the two people that are trained, what will they do that other people won't if they're trained, and so is everybody else in the building? I'm curious what the differentiation is between their roles in your view.
These trainings are developed by the National Epilepsy Foundation, so perhaps Kira can explain the difference between the two trainings.
Thank you.
Sure. While there is a certification program that those two individuals can take, there is also training for school personnel and just a basic seizure first aid training that's not as in-depth, but still provides the information that would be needed to be able to recognize different types of seizures and then also to act should someone have a seizure.
So what do we see as the role of the two highly trained individuals compared to the people who are trained biannually?
Well, if there would be a need for rescue medications, if there was any other health concerns that came about because of the seizure, but to have everyone be able to recognize different seizures, as some of this testimony has explained, is there are many different types of seizures and they can happen at any time with anyone, people who are not diagnosed. So it is really important for our teachers, as well as other school personnel, to understand when a seizure is occurring. So formerly known as the grand mal seizures, that's not always typically the type of seizure that someone will have. So it really is important for everyone who's in the school to be able to understand what different seizures may look like and then how to act appropriately.
My question goes more to the other two. What are they going to do that's additional? What do we see them doing as being highly trained? Are they going to train other teachers? Are they going to be expected to show up on site? And I'll add this in. You're requiring each school to have two. Having a school nurse seems like a good choice. Are we looking for other people to volunteer to be that person, or are we going to pay them?
I don't believe that they would be paid. It would be, I think, based on school leadership to decide who that person would be. Obviously, the school nurse would be one of those two people. And then the additional person, I think, would be based on who in the school would have an interest in doing that.
Madam Chair, if you will permit another response, perhaps Robin Elliott can provide some clarification.
Yep.
That's fine.
I'm happy to. So how it works with school nurses and delegation of the administration of medication, as it would in this case, is that the school nurse works with the administration and identifies if there is somebody else in the school who would be open to doing this role. And then the school nurse works with that person, assesses them and trains them. And then ultimately it's the school nurse's decision about whether or not that person is competent to administer or support the student self-administering the medication. So it all revolves around the role of the school nurse. And we thank the bill sponsor for working with us on making sure that that happens in the bill.
So just pushing John Willem's point, if you require two people, but you can't find someone who volunteers, then you're in violation of the law, according to this bill, if we pass it. So I have a little concern there. The only other thing I will say is that we said that teachers will train biannually for, I heard 2 different times, 45 minutes and an hour. And the quote was, at their convenience. Teachers don't have time at their convenience these days, and they haven't for a long time, and even less so now. So I'm going to suggest that we put in professional development money for those teachers to be trained during that time. I don't know if you want to respond to that as a suggestion, or if you just want to hear it and say, shake your head, whatever you like.
You could throw a, isn't that a great idea?
Isn't that something for us to think about? Yes.
Isn't that a great idea?
Okay, I see Delegate Washington and then Delegate Patterson. Delegate Washington.
Man, the energy that Delegate Ebersol has, I'm not sure if I can match that. Thank you, Delegate Kerr, for this bill again this year. I know you worked really hard on it and have worked with MABE, MSD, and others on this. And I just want to ask a question about, that we posed last year with a lot of bills that required school trainings, required trainings for personnel for health conditions or health concerns. How close are we to making it? Looks like MABE went from being in opposition to now friendly with the support with amendments. How close are we to resolving that question? And that's what I've asked everyone. Where are we with making sure that we can encompass or work with a lot of the other issues that we're going to see this year, that this committee is going to hear this year, that we have to require training for health conditions, and that has been the push of this committee to make sure that we can, because we believe it, we know that this is important issue, and we know that our students are suffering and have been suffering through this condition, and we all support this idea. We all want to see support for our students in our schools, but we're going to have 5 other bills this year that have other health related trainings, and just wanted to, again, let me just preface that because I know someone's going to talk about the data for this particular bill and how much important it is than the others, but I don't want to go down that road. I want to just focus on how can we resolve this major issue of training throughout the school system as it relates to health for our students. Responses to our students, and maybe Mr. Willems or Mr. Kerr can help us with that.
Can I make a response?
Yeah.
Okay. So the trainings are either on demand or they can be done maybe at a meeting, professional development day. But the ones that are online on demand, they can be taken at any time. Someone can take them in the privacy of their home. They could do it during a lunch break, after school. And it doesn't take a lot of time. But the impact of people understanding and knowing how to identify seizures and then what to do if someone has one, it's really important. So I don't think that, I think that the little bit of time that it takes to provide education and training really does outweigh what the impact is for the student or school personnel who could have a seizure.
I think you're responding to Delegate Ebersol's question and not mine. Mine is more so about the other issues related to health, disparate health concerns and trainings, and have we come closer to resolving that issue so that we can move one bill that talks about all the health concerns that our students face in the school that require school personnel to be trained. That's my question. I think you responded to Delegate Ebersol's question, or isn't that so statement?
Well, Delegate Washington, we're trying to be as flexible as possible. And I had encouraged the committee to take a look at the sample video that I sent just to see how the quality of the materials we're asking them to engage with. But we want to be as flexible as possible, and we want to give all of the local education authorities as much flexibility as they need to make it work for them. We don't look to specify when this has to be done or how it has to be done. Just can we find a way to make this? And I think this is your question as well. Can we find a way to make this work for everybody? And we want to work to find that answer. Hopefully we'll find it sooner rather than later.
As a teacher, can I respond to this question?
I think, let's see, Vice Chair, do you have any other questions?
I don't have any other questions. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My question has more to do with protocol. I see that in the Delegate Kerr, thank you very much, first of all, for the legislation. It says immunity from a civil liabilities from any act or admission. How is this identified? Is there a form that's filled out or some kind of disclaimer that the teachers or persons who have been identified will complete?
I think this is is what we refer to as a Good Samaritan law. And Josh, do you have anything to add about this? I know that.
Let me ask Ms. Elliott, since she identified that the protocol for nurses, is this comparable to what nurses would complete?
I will find out the answer, but I suspect that when the school nurse works with and identifies a non-clinician to be able to administer medication in an emergency, I suspect that it goes into the student's health plan somehow. And so there is a record that who that person is. But I'm happy to double check that and circle back to you on it.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 136. And now moving on to our last two bills, which are the vice chairs. We'll start with House Bill 118, and that's sponsor only. So whenever you're ready, Vice Chair.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I do apologize for being late. ECM held me up, so let's blame them for everything to help me up in there. But I hope they pass my bill. Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Washington here for the record to speak on House Bill 118, a bill in which this committee passed and the House passed with a 131-1 vote. It essentially makes mental health days an excuse absence for our students in our school system and levels the plan, makes it equal to that of physical health. With that said, Madam Chair, I urge a fair report, and I won't give an extensive hearing today or testimony today because this committee passed it out unanimously last year. But I'll take any questions anyone may have on the bill.
That is appreciated. Any questions? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 118, and moving on to the last bill of the day, House Bill 23 with the Vice Chair. And there are several witnesses, so everyone after the Vice Chair will have 2 minutes. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Delegate Alonzo Washington here to speak on House Bill 23, which represents a recommendation from the Maryland Commission on School to Prison Pipeline and restorative practices that will expand the accessibility of school discipline data and lower the threshold used to identify schools that disproportionately suspend subgroups of students. This bill also clarifies the role of SROs in our classrooms. Pieces of this bill were passed previously from this committee because we're smart in this committee. And so we passed the improving accessibility of school discipline data, which just says that the discipline data must be disaggregated on MSDE's website so that our advocates and also our researchers will have access to that information to be able to provide us with recommendations to improving school discipline practices. Easy ask, in my opinion, Madam Chair. The other piece was identifying disparities in school suspension. That's what we're talking about here is lowering the risk ratio. If a particular school suspends African-American students in comparison to white students 3 times as likely as many times there will be interventions for that school. It's 3 times as likely right now. What we're asking is for it to be 2 times as likely for there to be interventions. I did talk to MSDE, the superintendent's office this morning, and they did have what I believe to be a practical amendment to this bill to make it equivalent to how the risk ratio is currently for students with disabilities. So we're going to work through that with them during the subcommittee process. And the last piece, which this committee has heard from years from me that I've been working on, is SROs and changing and making in law that SROs cannot be involved in a disciplinary process for our schools. So it's routine discipline. We're not talking about students bringing guns to school or anything like that, or physical harm to another school or school personnel. We're talking about if a student is allowed in the classroom and the teacher cannot invite an SRO in the school to make that person to discipline that student. So that's what it does, and that's what it prevents. Some school systems already do this, but we're making it mandatory for all of our schools. This is something that this committee passed last year and passed the General Assembly and passed the House last year in a different version of a bill. But that's what this bill does. 3 pieces of different pieces of legislation that I thought were all interconnected that would be smart to do. So you don't have to hear 3 different bills. Thank you, Madam. I urge a favorable report on this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Next, Shanetta Martin for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair Atterbury and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak. My name is Shanetta Martin. I am the co-chair of the Maryland Education Coalition. We have been around for 40 years, are statewide in scope, and represent a diverse range of public education experts who are dedicated to equitable opportunities to learn for Maryland's K-12 students. MEC, which we go by, urges a favorable report for House Bill 23. The bill would address a significant gap in education reporting. Currently, student data lacks transparency. Challenges include difficulty in locating reports, which are difficult to use as they are available in PDF format, and the data provided are not inclusive of disaggregated information. House Bill 23 will require the Maryland State Department of Education to change the format of the annual state report of discipline data and include disaggregated data for high suspending schools. We are deeply concerned about the extraordinarily high number of African-American students who are suspended in Maryland. US data shows that 164,799 days of instruction are lost due to out-of-school suspensions in Maryland during the 2015 to 2016 school year. Of these, 68% of days missed were by African-American students. The Maryland Task Force on Achieving Academic Equity and Excellence for Black Boys here in Maryland also identified disproportionate suspensions of African-American students. They say in their report that Black students have triple the rate of suspensions and expulsions compared to white students and other student groups, and that the students most affected by exclusionary discipline policies in Maryland are bearing on Black boys and young men of color. Eliminating the disparities are important. We agree with this decreasing the threshold from the current standard of 3-to-1 to 2-to-1 for high suspending schools. We suggest that clarifying that the thresholds for high suspending schools be further defined to ensure the measure counts individual students who have been suspended once and not for each suspension they occur.
Ms. Martin, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your testimony. Thank you.
Yep. Finally, on the SRO issue, we concur with the intention that school resource officers should not engage in discipline-related activities for routine misbehavior, which is better handled by administrators and through the provision of improved training, restorative justice, and asset-based support resources for school staff and students. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, Frank Pantianella for 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Frank Patnell. I'm the Senior Education Advocate for the ACLU of Maryland. We are part of the Coalition to Reform School Discipline and the Maryland Education Coalition, and you have those testimonies, so I'll try not to overlap too much. We strongly support House Bill 23 with amendments. At the core of this bill is transparency and accountability. Over the past decade, the ACLU and many other advocates have been working collaboratively with their local school districts and MSDE to reform school discipline. We've been laser focused on disproportionality. There have been challenges in our collective work, but I can firmly say that the collaboration between advocates and government entities has been worthwhile and productive. We've seen notable improvements in school climate and promising outcomes for strategies such as restorative approaches. So we want to thank the committee for being a big part of this work and passing measures that have led to this progress. Much of the work now is about implementation, and we still have a long way to go to uproot the ingrained practices of unfair and harmful discipline practices. To that end, we need to maintain our collaboration with government, and to do so effectively, education advocates, which includes parents, guardians, and students, need to have access to the data. I want to highlight one issue in the bill that needs clarity by way of an amendment. This has to do with how the multiple suspensions for an individual student is counted. We assume that all multiple suspensions will be counted, but knowing how many students have had multiple suspensions for any given school is an important detail to include, and the bill needs to clarify whether or not these multiple suspensions count towards the total number of suspensions, which has implications for schools meeting the threshold for being categorized as high suspending. This level of detail will help advocates, school community partners, legislators, and school staff understand more about the situation at the school, whether this is a broad problem with school climate or whether the issue lies with a smaller number of students within a particular school. Lastly, I want to thank you for the passage of the blueprint bill. There's a lot to be excited about, the anticipated $4 billion plan.
I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap up. So
Sure.
You love the blueprint.
And to ensure that we are using every tool in the box to improve our schools and use the knowledge of the hard work of state established groups, including the state's Commission on the School to Prison Pipeline, we urge you to pass House Bill 23 with our amendments and those offered by our partners. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, testifying unfavorably, Vince McAvoy for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair and Committee. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm using a new headset. I'm speaking out against this bill. If I read it correctly, I'm looking at millions additionally being spent, and this is on top of the billions that were spent on the Kerwin plan. And we're still looking for money down the pike to get that money. I also have concern about the elimination of SROs. And just a couple of years back, we've had some serious crime in our schools where SROs were instrumental in keeping things from escalating. So I think that handcuffing them is not what we want to do. I also, if I'm reading this correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it looks like we're doing a scoring point where we're basically trying to ding those schools that are having high expulsions. There could be a reason for those expulsions. Again, I want to point to just last year's Maryland State Board of Education report on Black boys with respect to their options for their solutions, that we're not trying to keep reinventing the wheel. We have solutions that are inbound. Why are they not being implemented? I think that's a very big concern. If not from the MSPE, then from whom? And so I think this type of tabulating where we're disaggregating the issues that might deal with particularities of the situation while we are being very open and exposed and transparent regarding to the particular schools, as if to somehow ding them for disciplining children. If we don't have that, then we have sometimes chaos. We've seen in Baltimore City, there's actually city school teachers who've written books on this, but we see the videos of our teachers getting punched in the mouth, knocked out. We have real issues. So I don't think that.
Mr. McAvoy, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your testimony.
I thank you so much. So I'm against this bill, and I hope that some of these issues that I spoke about are reviewed. It's a 97-page report. There's a lot to chew on there. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the bill does not suggest removal of SROs and then in turn spending millions of dollars. So that's just a point of clarification.
Thank you.
Any questions for the bill sponsor or any one of the witnesses who testified? I see Delegate Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for bringing this bill. Sorry, I have a disadvantage of being new to the committee, so just trying to get a little more information on the bill. So please give me some grace here. So are you looking to make suspension data kind of very similar to the tool of the Maryland Public School arrest data? I think that's a really good tool. on being able to dissect the arrest data. So are you looking to have it mirror that report?
No, you're absolutely right, Delegate. We usually don't allow new people to Ways and Means ask questions, but this was a great one. So thank you for that. No, I'm joking, obviously. But no, that's exactly right. We want it to be interactive. We wanted to make sure that it's something that's easy that people can read and see. So you're absolutely right. That's right.
Thank you. And one more question. So I was looking at the bill, and again, you're going to learn about the smartest guy in the world, but I do my best. So the only line I see in here directly discussing SRO's ability to enforce rules and laws and such as the school resource officer may not unilaterally enforce discipline-related school policies, rules, regulations, procedures. Is there an opportunity in an amendment or subcommittee to try to clarify that for the school resource officers as well as school staff? Because there may be situations where a student may be acting out and a teacher may not know what to do when it's appropriate for a teacher to call in the school resource officer. Because if I'm a school resource officer, I see that, and I see a kid acting out, but not to the level as potentially interpreted, I may be hesitant to react. I don't want to get myself in trouble. Is there a way to maybe just do some subsections there and try to really clarify exactly what that means for everyone's benefit?
Sure, we can work that through, and I'll just point out that this language is supported by, or we worked it through with a lot of the different police departments that handle SROs or work through SROs. We did run it by MSDE too, and also MABE as well. That language that's in there. But we can, if you have some ideas, Delegate, we can talk about those.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any further questions? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 23. Thank you, committee. And I will see everyone, if not before then. We meet again on Tuesday at 11 o'clock for our fiscal briefing, which I'm sure will be riveting. And we will have hearings on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. So see everyone then. Thank you.